Subnautica, but I have Thalassophobia. Woohoo! Oh my god, that scared me. Now, many of you have probably seen Subnautica before, and this also does include myself. I know just about everything within the game, like creature spawns, schematic locations, where biomes are, but that still does not change the fact that I am absolutely terrified of being underwater. So never beating the game myself, I wanted to put a spin on it. This includes 2 different objectives I must do before I leave the planet. The first one is to hatch every creature in the game, and this totals to a bare minimum of 18 different eggs I have to find. And the second objective is to scan every Leviathan, have a complete understanding of each one, and hopefully give you, the viewer, a full understanding of them as well. So without further ado, it's now time to hop into Subnautica. I hope you enjoy. Just like every playthrough, we start with the main character jumping into the life pod and watching the aurora explode. And a nice detail I never noticed until now is that the explosion has a delayed sound cue, because just like real life, sound does not instantly travel. But once we get knocked out, we woke up, took care of the fire, accidentally burning myself in the process, and had to boot up our personal digital assistant. PDA for short. Of course, we had to grab our handy dandy first aid kit because we always need to get our first aids. And then we exited the life pod to say hello to the outside world. Jumping into the water, the first thing the game prompts you to do is to break a limestone deposit. That gives you a 50-50 chance between titanium and, more importantly, copper ore. But going back to the life pod, I now had to figure out what I needed for the tools I wanted to build. And a nice feature this game has now that it didn't have when it released is the ability to pin recipes to always see what you need. So I started with pinning the scanner, repair tool, survival knife, habitat builder, the flashlight, and the battery. Now, using the bottom exit for the life pod to get that animation done, I set out to get all the materials I could find for the different tools I'm trying to build. I started with gathering many acid mushrooms to get batteries. I found 2 metal salvage that each give you 4 titanium, and I found a coral tube. These tubes are usually the best early game source for finding like limestone deposits and quartz because they're just everywhere inside the tube and they're very easy to see. Back to my life pod with the materials I now had, I started with making 3 different batteries, then the scanner, some glass to make the flashlight, and then I turned my metal salvage into titanium I'll be using to build a base later. Now with the scanner, I went back out to only find 1 sea glide fragment, which is quite unfortunate, but I did grab myself some creepvine seed clusters so I can make myself some silicone rubber that is used to make myself some fins so I can swim faster in my survival knife. Also, while I was already in there, I did make myself a standard O2 tank for an extra 30 seconds of air while I was underwater. Now you might realize during this point of the video that the game is a little bit dark, which is fairly obvious. This is because I was trying to use the filmic mode, which makes the game a lot darker, more realistic, and in my opinion, does look better, but because it was so dark, I eventually did turn it off so you guys could actually see what's happening. But while it was pitch black, I did find myself the first fragment to the mobile vehicle bay. I found 3 different sandstone outcrops that have a percentage chance of giving you silver, gold, or lead, and out of all 3, I got a different material each time. I also needed cave sulfur to make the repair tool, and this means I have to find our good old friend, the crash fish. Now, these guys are pretty easy to avoid by just swimming in the direction they came in, or if you have a sea glide, you can just go in the opposite direction and they can't catch you. But still, if you're not careful, these guys can do some serious damage. But after only needing 1 cave sulfur and I got 2, I went back up to the life pod to make the repair tool and fixed up the radio and the electrical system that I don't really know what fixes, but it might be like the solar power cells so we can have power up and running. I don't really know. But when the radio is repaired, we get our first signal that basically tells us rescue is not coming anytime soon. So that means we have to go back out and continue our search for items. I did find the last 2 mobile vehicle bay fragments before the sea glide, which is usually not something that should happen, but it happened to me. But then we also just got the sea glide anyway, so that's good. Now having a much faster way to move around the map instead of just swimming, it made everything so much easier. I was able to get the last few materials to make the habitat builder, and now we can start actually building a base. But before doing any of that, I had another message on my radio, which was the first of many life pod distress signals that you get. And this one was 400 meters away from me. And not even 20 seconds later, I got my second one. That was 300 meters away from me. At this point, I was having a storage problem for my life pod. So this is why I wanted to build a base as soon as possible. To start with this tiny base, I built an X compartment so I can split it off in any direction that I needed to. And then I put a hatch on it so I can actually get inside the base. Then I might have gotten my third distress call that I had no idea how far it was, because for some of the life pods, all you get is a picture and then a description of where you can find it. But back to the base, I built built 2 different solar panels on top of it for power and 2 storage lockers to put all of my items into. And for this base, I also did need to make a fabricator and a radio so I didn't have to go back into my life pod constantly. While I was exploring for the items I did need, I went ahead and explored over to a life pod 17 that had our first Seamoth fragment and a PDA explaining the ship that we crash landed with was carrying things to build a phase gate, and that it also had a zero gravity gym. I have no idea how that is supposed to work. Now, if you remember, one of the objectives for this video was to scan every Leviathan, and being close to life pod 17, I encountered my first one, being the Reefback, which is completely harmless. This creature does come in at 30 to 70 meters long, with armor that no creature on the planet can break through. They travel in small herds, they use an echoing call to communicate, and as their name suggests, they do have a small local microcosm of life on their back. And this also does include a very valuable barnacle that is a great source of copper for early game. While exploring for the materials I still did need for the fabricator and radio, I did find my second Seamoth fragment alongside 2 laser cutter fragments that we will be using later. But back to my base, I built the radio, fabricator, and a high capacity tank that gives me an extra 60 seconds of air. Having nothing better to do, I went over to another life pod that didn't really yield any good materials, but I believe did have a PDA that was explaining that there is something faster than your Sea Glide, which is what we are currently trying to build, being the Seamoth. I did also find a grav trap fragment, our favorite trash can, and both fragments for the beacon. Going back to my base, I did make myself a beacon that I only used 1 time through this entire playthrough, which is very stupid on my part because it's always good to have 1 or 2 on hand so you always know where something is that you're trying to find. Even with experience, I still don't know where I'm going half the time. But alongside making that beacon, I did also make a compass I found the blueprints for at the life pod I just came from. And with this compass, I was trying to find the 3rd life pod that I only had a picture and directions for. So going in that direction to try and find it, I found a wreck that had the final fragment for the Seamoth, all the parts for the scanner room and bioreactor, and you also can't forget about the nuclear waste disposal and the bar table that I also did find. Arriving to the life pod I was trying to find, this one has one of the dumbest possible ways for any person to die. For a brief description, there was 2 different women in this life pod, one being reluctant to leave because they were scared, and the other one that went out to try and find materials so they can survive. Once the one that left for materials came back, the other one was waving a distress flare around on the inside of the life pod and then caught a fuel line on fire.
You'll catch the fuel line.
Me when impatient women just try and help. But luckily, this pod also did have a useful upgrade, being the Ultra Glide fins, so at least we got something out of this, outside of stupidity, of course. Close by that life pod, there was a wreck that I went to explore that I knew that had something I needed, and this was actually a very useful set of fragments for the battery charger. But while I was in there, I started to hear an audio cue I heard before in another playthrough that genuinely scared the shit out of me the first time I heard it. Like, you can't tell me that isn't scary. Like, when you're not expecting it. It's terrifying. Like, it's freaky, man. It sounds like a big kraken. Back to my base, I did have another message come through on the radio, and this was actually not a life pod, and instead another ship that would attempt to rescue us, being the Sunbeam. And their very first message was them receiving no communications back because everyone is pretty much dead, and your main character doesn't speak, and then they just talk shit afterwards, which is insane for these circumstances. But now that we had the battery charger and everything was readily available to us, I went out to gather all the materials, and then also got jump scared by a mesmer. I stand by what I said. No, it's not. It's not my directive. But returning, I did build the battery charger, put all the dead batteries in there, and now I had to build the mobile vehicle bay, which was a bit of a pain, but just like the battery charger, all the materials were close by, and so once I built it, I put it down and had to look for what I needed for the Seamoth. And it turns out I only had the lead and lubricant to start, so there was a bit of material gathering ahead of us. For some reason, while I was gathering the materials, the game had given me the radiation suit early. You normally get this when the Aurora explodes, but having it now doesn't change anything really. But in the mix of all of that, I did get another radio signal that was the Sunbeam again, and this time they had realized we actually crash landed, and they didn't seem to feel bad after what they originally said. But back to the material gathering, I did come across a new biome, being the Jelly Shroom Cave. This is a very important biome, but during this point I couldn't explore it yet because I didn't have the Seamoth and it's just simply too deep to explore it myself. So I put down my one and only beacon to know where the entrance is for future reference. And not even 3 minutes later, the Aurora decided to explode on us. genuine radiation. Shortly after I fabricated all the materials for the sea moth, I went ahead and pinned the radiation suit since we now need it, and we built our little favorite submarine. Look at you. Yeah. Now first things we do. Luckily, the suit was very easy to make, only needing 2 lead that I did already have. And I got some creep vine samples that I gathered with the survival knife to make 2 fiber mesh to then make the suit, and now radiation isn't going to be a problem. Now having the sea moth, I went back into the jelly shroom cave because, as I said, this biome was very valuable to us because there is an abandoned base that has many things you can scan around it, but most importantly, the multi-purpose room, which unlocks the large room so we can have much more space to work with. But the problem I run into is that this cave is still too deep for the sea moth at first because the max crush depth is 200 meters. And because I don't exactly know where this base is or where I'm going, I had the chance going past the limit while repairing the sea moth to hopefully find the base. And even if I couldn't find this base, there was still a good source of another outcrop down here, being the shale outcrop that has a chance of dropping gold, diamond, and most importantly, lithium. There is also magnetite down here that I will be using later in the game. I spent about 7 minutes in this cave swimming around, taking the chance of almost destroying my sea moth multiple times, and I just could not find this base anywhere. So I did try to leave to find a different entrance, and hopefully that entrance would lead me to the base. Hopefully. However, I instead did find a sizable wreck to explore. I did not have my hopes up for this wreck because usually the ones that are closer to the spawn area, they have just like the basic things you can find pretty much anywhere. But this one had to be one of the best ones I could have found during this point of the game. I was able to scan all 3 modification station fragments, which is where you get most of your upgrades in this game, 1 propulsion cannon fragment, my last laser cutter fragment, and then as a bonus, I got the floodlight, command chair, and the picture frame. After pinning the modification station and the laser cutter, I did need more diamonds. So again, I went back into the jelly shroom cave just to break more shale outcrops, because I couldn't find the base anyway, so there was just no point to try and look for it. But after I got enough diamonds, I went back to my own base, and like usual, the first thing that welcomed me was another radio message from another life pod that was 1,200 meters away from me. But during the meantime, I built my laser cutter, gathered many different materials needed to build a modification station, I placed it down, and then I made the Ultra Glide fins to move much faster, and a thermal blade that cooks fish without ever needing the fabricator, so it's very handy. And since there wasn't much else for me to do in the current moment, I wanted to go to one of the 2 life pods I still had on my screen. Now the one that was 1,200 meters away, I knew that would be the better one because of the blueprint that it offered. But on my way there, I did take a quick detour to a wreck that unfortunately only had the lightweight high capacity tank blueprints, which is okay I guess, my second propulsion cannon fragments, which is okay I guess, and a swivel chair, which is okay I guess. There was a second wreck right next to the life pod, so I figured just why not explore it, and this one was far better. It had got me the blueprints for the thermal plant, the prawn suit torpedo arm, the moon pool, a desk and an office chair, the power cell charger, the reinforced dive suit, a bench, and the Cyclops fire suppression system, so it had a lot to offer. But finally arriving to the life pod, there's some very valuable resources around here like gel sacks and ruby that I won't need right now, but later on in the game you need a lot of them, so getting them now saves me a lot of time for the future. But the blueprint I've been talking about that was around the life pod is the ultra high capacity tank that gives you an additional 90 seconds of air, which is huge. And then there was a PDA on the ground that was talking about a potential rendezvous point, I still can't say that word for the life of me, which is a landmass that's actually a floating island that we will be exploring a little bit later. But while this PDA was going on in the background, I did find myself a time capsule that was left by another player, which is a really cool feature this game has. And this had a thermal blade, purified water, and med kits inside of it. And I really wish I would have found this earlier because it would have came in very handy earlier on. Having many more blueprints to work with now, I went straight back home to get to work. The first thing I did is make the ultra high capacity tank for more oxygen, obviously. And then I made a moon pool for the sea moth so I could store it in there and so it could be charged. And temporarily, I also will be using this moon pool for pretty much everything else, like the lockers for the storage, the modification station, the battery charger, the radio, and the fabricator, just because there's a lot more room in there to work with rather than just using an X compartment. But now having more air I can work with while diving underwater and just feeling like I can actually stay alive longer, I went over to the second life pod that was on my screen. I did know this one was going to be a lot worse than the other another one because of the biome it was in, being the bulb zone. Mainly this just has one aggressive creature, being the amp eel, but still this is a creature that can kill me and do damage to my sea moth, so I did have a reason to be somewhat scared being here. But on my way there, I did find my first piece to the Cyclops out of the 9 total, and I also might have been a little bit scared because I heard a little friend in the background. I heard a very dangerous creature. This was the Reaper Leviathan that I'll be getting back to a little bit later because eventually I do have to scan this guy. The life pod itself does have an okay blueprint, being the repulsion cannon, which is sort of an upgrade to the propulsion cannon. However, the PDA for this life pod was valuable because it's the first piece of information that hinted at the possible disease this planet has going on inside of it. On my way back, I was able to find a few more Cyclops parts, being the last 2 hull fragments and 2 bridge fragments, and this only leaves 4 more parts I have to get at a later time. But if you also have been paying attention to what I have pinned at the top right of the screen, then you might have been seeing the reinforced dive suit there. I have to go all the way back to the area where I found the life pod that was 1,200 meters away from me. Close by here was another biome that makes me feel genuinely scared, and this is the blood kelp. But while I was here, all I needed was to grab 3 blood oil to make the reinforced dive suit, but that did come at a cost of my heart rate spiking. Oh, that music. Being back to a much safer place, I crafted myself the brand new reinforced dive suits. And then I realized I can't even use it yet because radiation was still a problem. And something I did not mention while I was having a heart attack at the blood kelp was that I did find the vehicle upgrade console at the wreck I'd already previously explored. And it's a good thing that I did check because this upgrade is extremely important and it allows me to get many of the very important upgrades that I need. One of these being the first depth module for the Seamoth that will allow me to go to 300 meters instead of 200, and a sonar upgrade that allows me to scan the surrounding area and know exactly where I need to avoid. But with these 2 upgrades, it finally means that I can go find the base in the Jelly Shroom Cave. And after putting in these upgrades, it only took me 2 minutes to find this base, so it was definitely a night and day difference having them. But everything that this base does have to offer me was the amazing water filtration system, the basic double bed for the homies, the wall planter, the multi-purpose room, which is why I came here in the first place, and the observatory. After getting everything from that abandoned base, I returned home and I realized that I never had given a name or a color to my Seamoth. So the best thing I could ever do was I had my friend decide the name for me. What should I name it, Jumas?
The Seameister.
Now, he told me this name was German, which is fairly obvious, I think, and then I made it red and black without having any idea what the implications might have entailed. Either way, I did stick with this name and color scheme for the entire playthrough, so I really can't go back now. But after that was done, I wanted to deck out my Seamoth with even more upgrades. So farming a bunch of titanium, and I mean a lot of titanium, I was able to max out the depth module to Mark III, and now the Seamoth can go to 900 meters. Back to something I mentioned earlier, it was time to explore the floating island. The very unique thing about this place is that it is held up by giant ancient floaters. Even though they are completely harmless and don't do anything to you, it still really freaks me out just seeing these. I don't know what it is, but something in my brain just makes me want to go very far away from these guys. When I first got onto the island, I was greeted by a PDA that explained that the rendezvous point was a complete failure and the people that came here had to try to go back to the Aurora for a data package that was sent there. However, they were intercepted by a Reaper and eventually died from something that isn't fully explained. While I was exploring this island, there were 3 different abandoned bases I was looking for that had very important materials. The first one I had found was the larger one closer to the middle of the island. This one had many things like the exterior grow bed that allows me to grow the different plant fauna around the planet, seeds for food that will solve my thirst and hunger problem, a bulkhead for base reinforcement, a juicy battery, a spotlight, our first purple tablet that we'll be using at the second island when we get to it, and the first stasis rifle fragments that I pretty much need to get in order to scan the Leviathans. The 2 other bases weren't as good as the first one. They mainly just had story elements, but one of them did give me the interior grow bed where I'm able to grow my own food alongside the lantern tree I'm able to grow as well. Once I got everything from the bases, it was time to leave the island and never come back. Can I go? go. Boom. That is freaky. I hate that. Okay, GG. Before going straight back home, I did have to take a quick detour to the blood kelp again to grab some deep shrooms I needed for an upgrade in the sea moth. Now being back home, I did get another life pod distress call that we will get back to later, but during the next 3 hours in the playthrough, I mainly spent this just building up my base and essentially over preparing myself. So instead of showing the material gathering, I will just go over everything that I added to the base. First on the agenda, I needed more room to work with, so this means I built my first large room, and this actually exceeded my base strength and possibly might have started flooding everything. So to fix this, I had to remove the hatch, and since I'm already using the moon pool as entrance anyway, I had no need for this. I built my interior grow beds to plant the lantern tree, Chinese potato, and marble melon. These will eventually be moved a little bit later because they're not in a spot that I exactly want them. I also built exterior grow beds on the moon pool so I can start planting gel sacks and deep shrooms just to have them on hand, but also for them to be used in the bioreactor for power. During this time, the countdown for the sunbeam was getting very close to finishing, so this gave me a good reason to head over to the second island and explore it after watching the sunbeam inevitably get blown up by the alien gun.
Change course. Set thrusters to full.
It's so damn cool. Being here, there were a couple of things that I had to do. The first was to explore the alien base, and inside here was a couple of ion cubes I'll be using much later into the game, story elements I will not be going into, a purple tablet, and a machine that tests subjects to see if the disease is still on the planet. Alright, I gotta poke myself. It's like I'm at the doctor's office. I don't want to get the needle stuck in my arm, but I have to. Ooh. The second thing I had to do while I was here was turning on the phase gate that links both islands together for easy transport and load it up on all the materials you can find here, being a ton of lithium and shale outcrops for gold and diamonds. When I went back home, I did have way too many materials on hand, so I had to extend my storage with 6 of the big lockers. I did receive my first signal that was from the warpers that were saying that there's 9 new biological subjects detected, and these were the Aurora survivors, including myself, and they were after us to kill us because we had the disease now. I moved over my fabricator and radio in the big room, then I made a bioreactor for power. When I was feeding this fuel, I made the absolutely terrible mistake of giving it the seeds rather than the actual plant, if any of you catch on to this. You never want to do this for the bioreactor because seeds give a very little amount of power, but I did realize at some point that I was making this mistake. While exploring for more materials, I eventually found my second grav track fragments that I will never be using. Then I made my last 2 upgrades for the sea moth, being the perimeter defense system and the solar charger. I did take a quick detour over to life pod 13. Unfortunately, it didn't have anything important for me, and all the PDA had was the survivor praying while he was falling, and then he died on impact. Speeding up the base building, I completely removed the old X compartment alongside the solar panels and put them on top of the moon pool instead. I did have to add a few reinforcements because I put a glass dome on the large room, I connected 2 more large rooms alongside the existing one, I built another moon pool for the prawn suit, and then I might have gotten my first hint at the Sea Emperor. I'm the man you're looking for. That's what I am, gorgeous. I built a scanner room to find materials. I did make some upgrades for it. I built a large room underneath the first one I built, filled that one with as many reinforcements as I could. I moved around the grow beds like I mentioned earlier. I made a water filtration system for purified water. And then I received another radio message from Altera HQ that was for the Aurora itself, being the code used to get into the captain's quarters that I will be getting back to later once I go to repair the Aurora. Using much more power with everything I added onto the base, I wanted to find a thermal vent with my scanner room to harness heat power. When I found one, I wanted to build 4 thermal plants on top of a foundation. While I was doing this, it did come at a cost of me nearly dying multiple times because of the heat and the little explosion from the thermal vent itself. But once everything was set up, I connected it to the main base with transmitters, and now we had an extra 1,000 units of power to work with. Getting close to finishing the base, I received one of my final life pod calls. That was 500 meters underwater in an area that I was a little bit scared to go to, so we'll save it for a little bit later. To finish building, I connected everything on the outside with glass corridors. I put some windows on the inside of the moon pools. Then I went a little bit overkill with making 4 battery chargers and 3 power cell chargers. Finally, having most of the base finished, I now wanted to repair the Aurora so I can use the reinforced dive suit. During my trip there, I did find a life pod 4 that I have not received a signal for. Inside here was the creature decoy launcher for the Cyclops, and the PDA explaining that this life pod was being attacked by a Reaper. Unfortunately, the survivor's calculations were a little bit off, so the creature decoy he was trying to use for the Reapers didn't last long enough for him to get to safety. Getting close to the entrance of the Aurora, I was using the sonar scanner on the sea moth to see where the Reaper was up here, and I might have been just a little bit scared of this guy. Oh god, you're facing me. Oh god. Oh god. Oh no. I see you. If I get through this hole? No? Going through the start of the Aurora, I found a few PDAs with story elements that I really didn't care too much for, a prawn suit poster, and then our first code for the cargo bay being 1454. When you do visit this area, you are technically supposed to bring that propulsion cannon with you, so you can move the objects that will be in your way so you can move forward. This was the case for the very first entrance into the cargo bay, but luckily, whether it was intentional or not, the developers did make it possible for you to parkour over the objects with a little bit of finesse. And the cargo bay itself didn't really have anything of value, except for like one PDA that just had some extra information. So going deeper into the ship, I went into my second room being the Seamoth Bay. Again, this area also didn't have anything useful. All there was a Mark 1 depth module for the Seamoth that I didn't need anymore, and a PDA that had a description of a VR suite log. The third room, once again, only had some PDAs with extra information. I believe this was the locker room, if I remember right, and alongside the information, it also did have some food and water, which is really good. But finally, I got into the prawn bay. This is the most important area because it gave me all 4 prawn suit fragments, so I can now make it. And I also found out there's a very sneaky storage module in here hidden behind the fire that I had never knew about for all these years that I have been watching Subnautica. Doing some more parkour, we now entered the living quarters. The first room I entered was the cafeteria and had my favorite Keep Calm Kitty poster, and then the best thing to ever exist: the vending machine. The bedrooms themselves in this area didn't have much besides like a prawn suit poster, the single bed, the natural selection poster, which is another game these developers made, a second prawn suit poster, the gorge toy, a blue cap, and then finally, the captain's quarters had the Neptune rocket blueprints with an Aurora poster and a little Aurora minifigure, which is pretty cool. And the last 2 areas I had to visit before repairing the Aurora was first through the prawn bay inside this jumbled mess of pipes inside the water here. This first leads to the black box that explains what happened to the Aurora during the crash. And the second area is the lab room that had a long essay of a PDA, some collectibles around the area, a counter to scan, and then data that had resynchronized to my repulsion cannon, but I don't really know what that means. Finally, entering the drive room, it was time to grab the Cyclops engine efficiency module and repair all 12 breaches inside of here to fix the radiation problem. Back home, I was now able to put on my reinforced dive suit, so I felt a lot more comfortable. And then I also had a radio message that was for LifePod 7, and this was far behind the Aurora. Before going to that though, I put down many different lockers that will all be used for ore-like resources. I put one down for health, miscellaneous, and electronics. Then one of my original lockers that I didn't dismantle, I'll be using that one for Creature X. Now going over to LifePod 7, there was a toy car, a PDA that was explaining the fabricator wasn't working properly in here. That presumed to be the reason that the LifePod sunk, but never was explained. And then the Markiplier doll. I had no idea you could scan and build for yourself. Not having much else to do, it was a perfect time to find the last few pieces for the Cyclops. For the engine fragment, I first tried looking near the back of the Aurora, where a Reaper is. I think actually 2 are around there. And not wanting to get too close to them so I didn't get killed, I wasn't able to find one. However, I did get my last bridge fragment, so that was fortunate. Trying a different area before going to the Reapers, I went over to the underwater islands, since there is a large wreck here, and the only hostile creature is the bone shark. They're more of a nuisance than anything. Unfortunately, I only found one engine fragment here, but inside the wreck, I found one propulsion arm fragment for the prawn suit, the chic
plant pot and swim charge fins, which was very terrible. Looking around on the outside again, I was also able to find the second stasis rifle fragment and only one drill arm fragment. This entire wreck, which is supposed to have many different fragments that you can find, I got extremely unlucky for this, and it truly made me feel defeated. So trying one more area for engine fragments, I went over to the mountain island where there was also another Reaper. Luckily on the side that didn't have the Reaper, I was able to find the last two I did need, and this means I can finally build the Cyclops. Once I got back to my base, I gathered every material needed for both the prawn suit and the Cyclops. Just like the Seamoth, it was time to color and name these two. To start with the prawn, I just made it purely black because I really like the look of it, just a very easy choice. The name, on the other hand, I was struggling with. I first thought of Brian Shaw because he's just a very big dude and the prawn suit makes you feel like you're a big dude. And then I tried Peaceful, which is not original at all. But I concluded with it being Pepper. This is actually a callback to Jacksepticeye's prawn suit in his playthrough when he named it, and because Pepper is also black, it just kinda made sense. Right before doing the same to the Cyclops, I had to build a few fabricators for the storage room, for convenience sake. I finally made my rebreather, and then I also made the stasis rifle. When I went to the Cyclops, it was a similar deal, just like the prawn suit. I was also struggling here. I went through a few names and color schemes, but nothing was working out. But then I remembered I always like to eat at Culver's. So with the fast food place having the same starting letter as the Cyclops, it was a perfect fit. And now I have a blue and white fast food submarine. Getting very close to setting off for my long journey to finish the game, I made myself a repulsion cannon that I will never use. Then I put a fabricator, radio, indoor grow bed with marble melon, a modification station, power cell charger, battery charger, and the engine efficiency module inside the Cyclops. And this will conclude part 1 of beating Subnautica with Thalassophobia. If you made it all the way to the end, I really do appreciate it. And of course, if you want to see part 2, definitely let me know in the comments section. I do want to say for the people that might be watching this and you're from my first video about Satisfactory, don't worry, the second part is eventually coming. I just really needed a break from the game since I spent over 200 hours making the first video, and I just wanted to upload something different on this channel. But either way, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any advice on how I can improve videos going forward, I would love to hear it. And if there is a game you'd also like to see on this channel, definitely let me know in the comments. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day, and I will catch you in the next video. Take care, everyone.